Welcome csc235 class to ex5-tipcalc. Now if you've done tipcalc before in another class, this is going to be a little bit different, so it won't be the same exact exercise. I'll show you the finished product, and we're not going to use JS2. We used this a few semesters ago, but we're not going to use it now. But I do have a finished product here that I could look at in this little preview window. Not that there's anything wrong with JS2, it's just we kind of like CodePen a little bit better. We have this set up so you'd basically put in a total bill for a meal. You can put a variable amount for a tip. It starts at 15, and you can use these buttons to go up or down, and then you'll see tip. It'll show you your tip amount and then a total charge, and you can even adjust it after the fact too. We're even going to build in kind of a validation so that if you don't put anything in here, you'll get an alert message that'll tell you please enter a meal amount, and it won't let you go any further. So that way you have to put in a meal amount. Let's say you spent $50 and you're going to do 15%. You'll see tip, and that'll tell you your tip amount, and it'll also give you a total charge. And if you want to kind of increase that, you could kind of put it up a little higher, and every time you hit see tip, it'll adjust the amount. So if you think you want to pay $10 or whatever, you know that would be a 20% tip, and obviously from their math it would be. And that's what we're going to do. So we're not going to do it in JS2, we're going to do it in CodePen. So what I set up so that to get you started, if you go to my Warren, I put a little section here, code to copy, but it's a text file, so you could just click on it, and it's just HTML code, not full HTML, but just body tags and below. And I'll just copy it, and I'm going to go to CodePen, and I'm already logged in here, so I'm going to go to my dashboard. I'll just kind of create a new pen, and I'll paste this in. Where you're going to paste it in is going to be into your HTML section to start. So I'll just click here, and I'll just paste it, and it'll recognize it as HTML. It won't look perfect yet. We'll adjust some sizing with CSS here because some of these fields are a little long and a little longer than they need to be. So we'll adjust some of those things, and then we're going to be working primarily with the JavaScript. So once you have this pasted in here, you can actually save it right away. You can actually click on the pen, and you're going to call it ex5, and you could just call it -tipcalc, and you don't need to put your name in because you're logged into your account, and that's all you need to do there. And then you can hit save. And if you want to add it to your collection, you could go to the lower right and just go collection. I'll put it in my csc235 spring 2018, and now it's in there, and now I'm all ready to go. So the first thing we're going to do in here is just do a little bit of CSS just so it looks a little nicer, and then I'll kind of explain what some of these things are. But even just so it looks a little better, everything's a little small right now. There are body tags in here, and actually I'll just move the JavaScript down. There's body tags in here, so the first thing I'll do is I'll just put a declaration for body, and I'll put my opening closing brackets, and I'm just going to make the font size a little bit bigger. I'll make it like 120%. And you could probably get away with 115 as well, but I'll put 120 for now, and I'll put a semicolon after here. And I think that's it for now for body, although another thing you might want to put in is a margin. So I'm going to put in a margin, and I'll make it go all around. So I'll go margin, and I'll just make it like 2M, which is basically 2 times whatever the default font size is. So it might be somewhere around 32 pixels. It might be adjusted because of the 120%. So it might be around 70 pixels or something like that once, or it might be actually maybe around 40 pixels or something. So anyway, or you could put pixels. If you want to just put pixels, you could just do that and forget about the math. 40 pix. And there it is. So now we have a little margin. If you think that's too much, you could make it 30, and I'll put a semicolon. So that's all I need for body. So that made most of our text, but if you notice, it didn't make our text fields bigger, and it didn't make this little button text bigger. And we do have buttons in here. That's what these are. There's even these less than, greater than signs are buttons, and see tip is a button. There's 3 buttons, and here's a button, 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 and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 input text fields. Some of them we're going to input, some of them we're going to use to display. Actually, one of them we're going to input, and the rest we'll use to display. So now we're going to make those a little bigger too. So the next thing I'll do is I'll do input, and I'll make the font size a little bigger for them. Now I won't do 120. I'm actually going to make it smaller. So even if I did 100%, you can see it does make everything just a little bit bigger. And again, those are the input fields, so they're about the right size. They're pretty good as far as, you know, the height of them, and we're also going to adjust the width of them. But you can see our buttons are still small, so I'm actually going to make one for buttons. I'll make a button, and that one I'll also do font size. And this one I don't even have to go 100%. If I do 100%, that's going to be too big. And you can see that button's a little bit bigger, so maybe you could just do 90 for button, and that's good. That's the way pretty much things look on the sample, so that looks okay. These things are a little long because there's only going to be short numbers in here, so we can go to input and add a second declaration for input, and I'm just going to put width, and you could use pixel if you want. I'll try like, 80 pixels or something like that. See how that looks to start, and that shortens everything. You could use IDs if you want and make this one shorter and these longer or whatever. Maybe I'll make it 90. And that'll be enough for us to put in kind of, 2 digits and the cents. We're also going to have 2 digits for the cents after that. So that's pretty good for now. If we have to adjust it, we can adjust it later. So that's all we have to do with the CSS. So I'll save what I have so far. So that's just a little HTML. Paste it in there, some CSS, and I don't really have anything to do with the CSS, so I'll kind of minimize the CSS right now. And I'll take a look at the HTML just to see what we have here, just to point it out. We have an H1, that's our headline. We have a paragraph that says please enter total amount. We have a paragraph that says click the arrows. We have a paragraph that says tip amount and a paragraph that says total charge. So we have 4 paragraphs, and then we have what are called input text areas or input text fields. They're input type equals text. So this is input type equals text. We have one here, and then we have one here, and one here. And if you look at them, the first one, it says input type equals text, and they're all type equals text. But they have IDs so that we could communicate with them through JavaScript. So we could identify them. And the first one is called total meal, because it says total meal amount. I tried to be as literal as possible rather than be short and, So we have total meal, and then this one is called tip percent, and I spelled it out. I just used underscores to break up the words. So this is tip percent, has an ID of tip percent. This one is tip amount, and this one is total charge. So they all kind of make sense as far as they're exactly what they look like. So there shouldn't be any kind of confusion over that. Hopefully they're written so that you could understand them a little bit better. All right, the next thing I want to point out here are the buttons. There's 3 buttons. There's a less than button. There's a button that has like a little less than sign and a button that has a greater than sign. They're kind of like arrows, but we actually, if you look at the code, they actually have a symbol called &LT semicolon. And this one is &GT. So it's ampersand less than semicolon ampersand GT, because if you put less than signs in with the HTML code, it confuses things. It thinks you made an error. You can't just go in here and use a less than sign as text. It'll kind of come up as an error, so it will have problems. So we want to make sure that we kind of leave it the way it is, and you're just aware of that whenever you want to mix in less than signs with, with HTML code. Make sure you use those special character symbols, and that's what we used. And if you see these symbols here, these are non-breaking spaces. There's 3 of them in a row, and they just basically create that little gap there because you can't use more than one regular space, so those are non-breaking spaces. So that's everything visually we have there. Again, we're going to type into here, 120, whatever, so that size is good for now. So we're going to be typing in here, and then these are going to be used just to display information. So we're going to get started. So I'm going to cover up my HTML right now, but just be aware the things we do have to know are the IDs, total meal, tip percent, tip amount, and then total charge, which will be more at the end. So we're going to focus on our JavaScript right now. Let me minimize this again and move up the JavaScript so we have lots of room here. I'll spread this out as far as I can because we don't need a lot of room over here. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to need some variables for this to represent some things, and we're also going to display some data in here. And the first thing, we're going to leave this alone for now because this is actually going to get generated once we run our function. So we're not going to worry about this right now. We're actually going to focus on this and making everything work down here, and then we'll worry about taking this value from the beginning because we want to make sure we have a value here. So the first thing we're going to do is basically display 15 in here as a default. So to display something in there, we need the ID, which it's called tip percent, and we're going to use that. We're just going to start off with document.getElement by ID, And remember, it's a capital E, capital B, capital I. And then in parentheses, we're going to put tip percent. And we used all lowercase and we used an underscore. So it's tip percent. So we're going to we're basically targeting that ID. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say dot value. We haven't used that property yet, but we're going to say dot value. And we're going to say equals 15. And we're going to put a number in there. And I'll put a semicolon. So that's where we're going to put it, and you can see it's showing up there already. And again, we can adjust the length of that if there's too much space in there, we could adjust that. But that's displaying it. And what we also want to do is we want to hold this value as a variable so we could use it in some of our calculations, because we're going to have to multiply it by the tip amount, by our meal to get the total charge, and we're going to have to figure out the tip amount and things like that. So we're also going to hold it as a variable so we could use it. This is just for display. And in fact, you could even go here and put a comment, and everything you put in here, it's kind of like your personal notes. So the more comments you put, the better. And if I see you're putting comments in there, that's great. And you're going to say displays the default tip amount, because that's what it's going to do initially. And that's what this does. This doesn't display anything that's changed. It just displays the default tip amount. That's all this line does. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit return, and we're going to make a variable. And before I make my variable, I'm just putting a comment here saying creates a variable for the tip percent, just so I know that that's a variable, that this displays it. It's basically setting the value of an input field to 15, or actually this one down here. And this one's going to be a variable so that I could use it for math that happens later. So I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to say var, and I'm going to create the name of the variable, and the name can be the same name that I use for the ID. There's nothing wrong with having an ID the same name as a variable name, as long as it doesn't confuse me. And I'm going to keep them the same, and I'll call it tip percent. And you can see it's going to create a variable name in blue, and I'm going to say that variable equals, and it's going to be equal to whatever is the value in here. And I'll just copy this and put that here, and I'll put a semicolon. Now, one thing I just want to point out, and I'll do this now until later, because sometimes I wait till later and then we get errors and we try to figure it out, but I just want to show you something right now. Right after this, I'm going to do something called console log, or console log. And console is like a debugger. It's going to kind of find errors, and it's kind of like a little behind the scenes kind of display that people wouldn't see, but we can see to kind of test things out. And I'll say console.log, and in parentheses, I'm just going to put tip percent. I'm going to put the variable inside there, and all that it'll do is just display the value of that when it runs it. So I'm going to save what I have, and I'm going to go to console, and you can see what's happening here. It's saying 15, 15. Let me clear it, and I'll just kind of, I could even reset it here. And it's saying 15. Now you might think, well, what's wrong with that? The problem is that 15 in quotes is actually a string. It should actually look like this. It should look like a number. And we're going to have problems using that later. So rather than wait till problems develop, I'll tell you ahead of time. I'll close this up. What we're going to do, I'm going to get rid of this, or I could just comment that out for now, because we might want to use it for later. Right after I do this, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do tip percent equals, and then I'm just going to do something called Parsefloat, which is something that takes a value and converts it to a number. And since what happens is these values inside of text fields, because they're input text fields, they show up as text. It doesn't, even though we type in a number, JavaScript doesn't understand it's a number unless we kind of convert it to a number. So we're going to make sure we use something called Parsefloat to kind of force it. And I'm just going to put tip percent in here, and I'll put a semicolon. And if you don't know what that's going to do, I guess I'll uncomment this again, and I'll save this, and I'll go to console, and I'll clear it, and just kind of run it again. Just take something out and put something back, and now you can see it's a number. It's a 15. It's actually, that's an integer. It's a number instead of, in terms of its data type, it's no longer a string. And that's going to be very important. So I'm doing this now rather than wait and do it later and have all these errors occur. I'm just telling you now that by doing this, you can make sure that you're going to be adding up things that are numbers and not strings, because it's really hard to figure out if you're not used to it. But I'm telling you right now. So I'm going to comment that out right now, and then we're going to take a break here. And then knowing that, that'll help us going further, that now we're dealing with a number by this, because we could use this for some of our other variables as well, because we're going to be taking values from here and adding them up. We're going to want to make sure that they're numbers and not strings, or else we're going to have some problems. So Parsefloat is just a little conversion that makes sure that whatever is in here is going to be a number. So I'll take a break here, and we'll move on to part 2.